All right, people, we've made it. Another season finale. Season 4, episode 10, The Children. After last week's banger of an episode, I didn't think we could get much better, but it turns out we did. As it turns out, you can actually one-up the big battle sequence episode. Pat, what do you have to say going into season 4, episode 10?
Well, Dom, I think the Talking TV family can agree with me that, it's the new blood, right? The new characters are being introduced into the show, and it's being teased, so I guess we'll find out more next season.
Indeed. This is the season 4 finale of Talkin Thrones. Well, Pat, another season come and gone, another finale. I love doing these episodes. They're always so much fun because we don't just talk about the episode in and of themselves. We always talk about kind of the overarching story threads that have been established since the beginning of the season. We always talk about kind of where the characters are in their journeys towards that very awful series finale. And this is a big one for a lot of different reasons. The episode is obviously entitled The Children. If we're going to go with the actual literal translation, this episode has its chock full of moments. Tyrion killing Tywin, the duel between Brienne and the Hound, Stannis finally arriving north at the wall. And, there's a lot of big moments that happen in this episode. But for me personally, the big takeaway from this episode is that this is really kind of the culmination of everything that season 4 has been doing, which is kind of shaping after the gangbusters event of the Red Wedding. It's shaping up the remaining characters, placing them onto their different points of the chessboard in order to kind of navigate them towards their new phase of their journey. There's a lot of endings that happen in this episode, a lot of characters going off to quite literal new destination that they've never been to before, a lot of symbolic representation, a lot of symbolic closing the doors on a lot of journeys that we've been following for the last couple of seasons. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that going into this episode?
My biggest thoughts, now, because I watched this episode last night to prepare for today, and the only thing I can think of, to be honest with you, is, does season 5 have the oysters and cockles
yes.
From Arya?
Yes, it does. That is unfortunately where it begins.
Yeah, because it's like I was hoping
into that too.
I was hoping they would get through one more season without that, but I guess it is season 5 from what you're telling me. So we're about to head down that storyline, and although this finale, Arya's arc is like the perfect place to end season 4, because I don't want to get too much into it right now, but like just that final sequence, with Brienne and the Hound, and what Arya has, it's all about like Arya having to make a decision, and she's been roaming around with the Hound. The confrontation is all about, her protection, and, like who's going to better serve her, the Hound or Brienne. And the fact is, Arya is not, this little girl that needs to be protected anymore. She's someone that, has a bigger purpose, and someone that, is going to jump on a boat and really kind of be on the open sea for, I guess, an entire off season of the show, before she gets to the selling of her seafood.
Oysters, clams, and cockles. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So, but the fact is, like, it's speaking of the children in the name of the episode, she grows up in that duel, right? She's witnessing the Hound and Brienne fight over her as if she's helpless. And, at that moment, she makes a decision, and she strikes off on her own. And, I think it's a big moment for the character. And, it's one hell of a scene as well.
Well, it's one of the biggest reasons to me why it sets this episode apart from not only the other series finales, but also probably is one of the best episodes of the whole show, is the fact that you kind of have those really critical storytelling, like not coming of age, that's the wrong phrase to use it, but like coming to a decision, let's call it, for lack of a better word, for all the major characters we really explore. You know, like I said, we wrapped up a couple of the other ancillary arcs 2 episodes ago in the Mountain of the Viper, obviously, with the Theon Ramsay arc, the Sansa Vale arc. You know, we wrapped those up a couple episodes ago, but you know, kind of building off of the momentum of the Watchers on the Wall and just how impactful and how much of a critical coming of age moment that was for Jon and Sam and all the survivors of that fight. We kind of have, again, like Jon, you know, finally make a decision. You know, again, he's past the point of being a boy. He now understands his purpose and, you know, what he's doing for his greater cause. You know, you have Tyrion making a similar decision, you know, finally like kind of gaining a little bit more control or semblance of control on all the hardships that have kind of, you know, followed him in his life. You have, again, a smaller moment and kind of an overlooked sequence from this episode, but also the whole Cersei revelation to Tywin and finally gaining some authority in her life that she's really never had before. Daenerys as well has to make a very, very difficult decision that may not seem so to a lot of people, but is that way. You know, all across this episode, you have all of these characters coming to terms with kind of everything that we've known about them that has kind of so driven their identities for these past 4 seasons that we've watched. And so it really makes this, I think, really fascinating as far as tying a nice little knot on an entire season that has kind of been dedicated to almost deconstructing everything that we thought we knew about what was already a pretty deconstructive show to begin with.
Yeah, the only thing I had to say is that moment with Cersei and just, you know, confronting Tywin and saying, "Hey, listen, all those rumors that were in front of you the whole time,
they're true.
They're all true."
They're all true.
And, you know, and it's
the look on his face. It's amazing.
Yeah, I just have to applaud her timing, right? You know, it's like, hey, listen, I'm going to tell you this fact, drop this bomb, and then, you know, later that evening, he can't really sleep, and so he goes down to the privy, and there's Tyrion.
And he gets caught by Tyrion.
Escaped with a crossbow, and it's
I mean, again, R.I.P. to the great Charles Dance. This is the last episode that he's in, obviously alive. You know, we see his body in the next couple episodes, but like obviously, you know, Tywin is one of a few characters that meets their untimely demise in this episode. But yeah, it's the look on his face, and I love too the line that she delivers where she's like, I don't care about you telling another story about the time that you won. That was just
everything about it is great specifically with the Lannisters. I think,
yes,
you know, one of those things is like, you know, Cersei tells off Tywin and then goes and tells Jaime, it's like, oh, you know, I finally have a backbone. I told off Papa, and, you know, like, you know, and then basically they start making out, and it's like someone will come in and it's like, I don't care, you know,
I don't care, like kind of
whatever.
Their like finalized version of again, like kind of playing into that whole this season being the whole deconstruction of the Lannisters, you know, thing that I was talking about at the beginning of the season. You see all of those seeds in this episode come to fruition.
Yeah, but it's the defiance here. Like Cersei is finally defiant of her father and not doing, you know, what he expects and telling the truth and, you know, doing what she finally wants. And she immediately goes and confronts Jaime and talks to him about this. And later on in the episode, you know, after I think a little bit of a break, that's when, you know, Tyrion's sitting there in prison and Jaime comes in and decides, hey, I'm working with Varys to get you free. And, you know, I think it's one of those things where like Cersei finally, you know, trying to stake her freedom away from Tywin leads to Jaime thinking he could do the same, which ultimately leads to, you know, sort of Tyrion to basically, I guess, ultimately doing the same in his own way. But, you know, that leads to obviously Tywin's murder. So I think it's like a chain. It's like a chain reaction, you know, it's the defiance, like, you know, I guess Tyrion has always been defiant, but like Cersei decides to be defiant, which leads to Jaime, which leads to
it's a whole
Tyrion.
Chain reaction that just kind of
exactly
results in Tywin's death, and well, we see the results of that we see the results of that in the later season. So let's start this episode. Again, this episode picks up right where the last episode left off. Jon north of the wall. Jon marching right into Mance's encampment. I don't know, kind of like, what are the odds that he actually would have been able to like walk into that encampment like fully alive without some wildling coming in and trying to kill him first? I mean, I know that they're still kind of exhausted from the battle the night before, but
I think, you know, the tree line is pretty good distance away. So when they see the you know, cave open up and clothes, and they see one guy walking towards the tree line. I don't think they're really that scared.
That's true.
They obviously set up in a formation to surround him when he comes into the woods. And he's going to talk to Mance.
He even says it. He's like, it's pretty obvious. It's like, yeah, I'm one guy. I'm here to talk to Mance. I'm here to negotiate, even though we all know what his real intents and purposes. And again, the conversation that follows. I mean, again, we consider the fact that, again, we haven't seen Mance Rayder in an entire season and a half since episode 3 of last season, I think, is when he sent Jon and Tormund on their little mission south of the wall. And so he sits down with them and, immediately greets him as like, oh, so you're wearing a black cloak again. It's like, looks like my trusting nature got the better of me. And they sit down, they have a great conversation. It's great.
Yeah, I think it's
putting all their cards on the table.
Everything's great. It's like pour him a drink. He thinks it's poison. I could kill you so many other ways.
Of all the ways I could kill you, poison would be the last.
Exactly. And so I think, basically what I think is smart about this scene is that, obviously Jon is there to kill Mance. And I think Mance suspects that before they even get down to sit.
He has to suspect it in some capacity.
Because he's like, I'm going to offer you a drink. I'm going to offer you some food. I'm going to do this and that. And then it's like, oh, that's why you're here, to kill me. Like, after I offered you all this stuff. Right. Is that the type of man you are? Is that
what a man of the Ninth Watch does? Right. Again, attacking Jon right where his low is. Attacking Jon again with his precious honor, the whole thing. Because, again, it's the thing that always drives me nuts. It's the same thing as to why I wish that Jon could get on board with Alistair Thorne. It's almost damn near the same thing with Mance, where they're both fighting for the same thing, just on opposite sides. And that's the thing that Mance really solidifies and really hammers home here after they talk about their dead, and they have a really great moment toasting Ygritte and Gren and Mag the Mighty and all their other fallen on both sides. And you even see Jon take a note from this book after Mance's unfortunate death in the season 5 premiere, which is that he ultimately understands that at the end of the day, none of these divides, not all of these political divides, like, they're all pointless. Mance even says it himself. He's like, look, we're not here to wage war and fight. He's like, we don't care about killing crows as much as we say. Yeah, we're here to hide on your side of the wall.
Well, I like the way they put it. Is we're here to access your tunnel,
right?
And get to the other side.
And I'm not gonna lie too. If not for the fact that they just fought a giant battle, and the fact that they're still everybody's still pretty on edge, Mance offers some pretty reasonable terms there, which is that it's like, look, let us through the wall and we won't attack any of you. Again, like, it's kind of hard given just the circumstances, but considering the fact that that's exactly what Jon does the whole season later, it's like, I don't know, those seem like pretty reasonable terms.
Oh yeah, and I also think, imagine this division didn't really happen, and
right,
maybe Jon knows more information about what's happening at Winterfell with the Boltons. Like, he could easily have them, come south.
So easily.
Set up some sort of encampment, do some training and do some plotting to really retake Winterfell. Obviously, as Lord Commander, or even with Alice, what's his face?
Thorne. Alistair Thorne.
Yeah, Alistair Thorne. Even with him, sort of in charge, like, maybe that wouldn't be necessarily the first goal.
Right.
But the fact is, like, over time, he could get to know the wildlings, or the Northerners, so to speak, and sort of like a relationship and a force that could deal with the Boltons at some point later down the line.
Right.
Instead, it's like, the whole thing happens where the Night King sort of raids their camp, leads to a lot of them dying. They have to flee. So their strengths later on are still decent, but not as good
much
as
dwindled,
if
definitely.
they figured it out.
Right. It's like, because that's the whole big point of reference when we get to Battle of Bastards, is the fact that even though Jon has a decent amount of wildlings, it's not enough entirely to take on the Boltons. It's why they have to go on their little parade and recruit the next couple of houses. So yeah, definitely something interesting there. Like, we'll get into that once we get into season 5, as we get into, like, again, how they really, really started to deviate from the books. Because obviously, as we know, season 5 is the last season that's fully based on the books. But as again, Jon makes his move. Mance quickly realizes, oh, so that's why you're really here. He starts jabbing away at him, but next thing you know, they hear trumpets outside. They hear horses. Mance is like, "Is this you?" And Jon's like, "No, it's like you said, we don't have the men." And next
I think that was great. Is the back and forth, like, Mance is just like, I think you only got this many men. It's like,
well, because he knows that Jon's a liar at this point. In his head, he's
exactly.
Look, if Jon lied to me about all of it, he has to be like, there's no way the Night's Watch has 100,000 men. He's
well,
like,
I think John said something like 1,000, in this scene.
1,000, right, exactly.
He's like,
you don't even have 300 men, especially after how many people we killed last night,
Yeah, but I like the reliance on, Mance saying, I'm telling you the truth, I'm being straightforward, and when push comes to shove, John immediately basically,
John
realizes he has to tell the truth as well.
Right.
So, it's one of those things where, I think for the first 4 seasons of the show and maybe into the next season with the fact that Stannis is around, John has all these great teachers, Mormont, Ned Stark, obviously Mance Rayder,
to an extent, Alliser Thorne.
Yeah, Alliser Thorne, like Stannis, like Davos becomes a teacher. So he has these great teachers, and that make him a great leader throughout the show. And so, I think it's just great to watch these scenes and watch where he sort of becomes this noble character, where the influences come from. I think that's really the great part of Jon Snow's character development, is just seeing how he reacts to other great leaders that he's dealing with during these particular scenarios.
100%. And as we see, Stannis, it's a great shot too, with the army literally just all charging, right from next to the wall. They charge.
I like the guy that tries to kill Stannis.
The one guy that tries to kill Stannis, and the rider just comes in and takes him out. That was great. That was hilarious.
Stannis he's basically, he's confident. His men know how to protect him. He's not going to be stopped by some random guy running in. So it's, I don't know. It's definitely a cool sequence. It's a surprise, right?
Exactly. It is a surprise. Again, immediately establishes the tension, the back and forth there, where Stannis is like, "Oh, so you're Mance Rayder," and he's like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Even so, we don't." He's like, "Oh, this is the king of the Seven Kingdom, whatever that Davos says," and Mance is like, "Even still, we don't kneel." A man of principle to the end, very much so. Davos notices John with him. He's like, "What's a man of the Night's Watch doing here?" And he's like, "Oh, I was sent to negotiate with the king beyond the wall," and again, like it's a moment that I was kind of really waiting for, where it's like, okay, so this whole kind of, at least Stannis' whole, movement within the story, within the overall story, started from Ned Stark sending him that letter originally, telling him the truth about Joffrey's parentage way back in season 1. And so I was always going to wonder, even building up to how it was going to end in the books, this is exactly where Storm of Swords ends for Jon in in the books, is Jon negotiating with Mance and then Stannis coming in to, quote unquote, save the day. And so it was always going to be interesting to me seeing how the bastard son of Ned Stark was going to react with the brother of Robert Baratheon, kind of almost like these extensions of like these, almost like kind of the next phase of like these previous two people that fought together. So I was always going to be interested in the relationship that developed between the two of them. And you see here, it's like the beginnings of like this steadfast, like back and forth relationship with them, which is where they don't necessarily entirely trust each other, even though they probably should, but they both know that they kind of stand for the same things, which is, that sense of honor, that sense of duty, that sense of moral righteousness. And they, as a result, are able to kind of learn from each other and also do things that the other might not do, but also, come to learn and respect of each other. Like I said, Davos immediately tries to, put Jon in his place and be like, "Oh, this is the king." And Jon's like, "I know exactly who he is. My father died for him." I love that.
I think, this is a great sequence because, it's obviously Jon Snow quickly and rightfully is like, "Your Grace," and all that type of stuff. But, invoking Ned Stark and being like, listen, what my father would have done is he, would have listened. He would have taken this man prisoner, Mance, and he would have listened to what he has to say. And, it's like, but you know what else my father would have done? He would have
burned the bodies. Burn these bodies.
Yeah. It's something like, seeing what I've seen, he would have also burned the bodies of all the dead. And so it's, that's kind of an ominous thing. You get told that you should take this man prisoner and then burn all these bodies.
Right. And I love the White Walker music that's slowly playing in the background, and they almost kind of mix it with the Melisandre theme as well. And you see that kind of like motif kind of carried through in the later sequence when you have that mass burning with that great speech that Maester Aemon gives, and you see Jon as he's burning the bodies, he sees Melisandre staring at him very sexually in the distance. And I'm like, oh, great. So now Melisandre's got a new target. So now we understand that there may have been an ulterior motive for her coming north of the wall as well. But there are a couple more sequences that I think are just really, really tie up this whole sequence really beautifully, which is, of course, Jon's final conversation with Tormund, where they talk about
that was great.
Egret. Oh, it's amazing. It's unbelievable.
I think the best thing is Tormund goes, "Did you love her?" And he doesn't really. I don't know if he really answers.
He doesn't really answer. That's the thing. He's kind of.
And then he throws it in his face. It's like, "Well, she loved you." Not that she ever said it. She just talked about killing you.
That's how I do.
That's how I know. Yeah,
I love that.
It's great thinking. And also Tormund's trying to catch him off guard. Right. He's bringing a certain charisma to the situation. And talking to Jon this way, and I think it's one of those things where this is why the two of them can get over this hump and be friends
and also become great allies later on.
Yeah, because they know the deal. They know that they are able to sort of get beyond the situation they were in, and they're gonna be able to team up pretty handily. Going forward in the next season and in the seasons after. So
absolutely, while also giving us a chance to say one last, and also giving Jon and us the audience one last chance to say goodbye to Egret by telling him, she belongs in the north, the true north, and so Jon takes her north of the wall and gives her that little burial ceremony, and you kind of see him it's almost like that last look of boyhood innocence. You could see him dealing with that, leave his face before he just gets up steadfastly and just marches away from it as you see.
Yeah. I think this would have been a perfect opportunity, to maybe tease, the Night King, maybe have the Night King sort of staring off from the distance, and Jon sort of sees him but walks away. You know what I mean? It doesn't not necessarily need.
Hold that point. We'll get to that in a little point, because obviously we see that this is not the only storyline that occurs in the North real quick. But let's cut to Meereen real quick. This is it's the shortest segment of the episode. It's very brief, but it does still tie up thematically. Kind of this sense of the characters having to say goodbye to this piece of themselves that they knew in the past, which is of course Daenerys learns that maybe it's not a good idea to have some
can I tell you
adolescent dragons just casually flying around.
Can I tell you I hated this whole sequence.
I figured
watching it this time.
I figured you would have.
No, it all makes sense, but it's just how many people is she going to listen to? That's all she does is every day they come in.
She becomes the Mad Queen. I'd go mad listening to 10 of those people.
Yeah, but it's the same problems over and over and over again. It's I used to be a teacher, but now I'm nobody. And
the thing about this conversation is it brings up, once again, playing into her whole arc throughout this season, which is her constant wondering of, doing the right thing on the surface, but then once you actually break down the nitty gritty and kind of every little piece of it, you realize, oh wait, it's kind of problematic. And I kind of get where the guy's coming from. Which again, the guy, the classist struggle both applied to the slaves of the cities as well, and that the slaves of the more of certain of the wealthy, definitely again, it's the whole thing. We talked
about. What's this contract going to be? You just live in my house and I feed you and then you teach my kids.
Well, again, it's not. I think that's specifics of it. It's more so about the overall generalized idea of it.
Yeah, but I understand. The main thing is she could very easily change the system where it's no longer slavery, but it's
a form of indentured servitude almost.
Well, it doesn't even have to be indentured servitude. It could just be, you're selling your labor. Why can't she start a school and get other slaves like this to be a part of it, and make an attempt? You know what I mean? The sequence is so small that it's all about
I get what you're going for.
It's just instead of doing all that, instead of starting a school and having the state pay these people and try to recoup the money through the masters paying for it, forget it. I'm just going to allow you to go back to being a servant.
And again, I get where you're coming from, and that definitely builds into, again, more so which is the kind of crux of the arc her entire season, which is her inexperience with learning and the fact that almost she doesn't. I don't really. It's not.
Well, I feel like it streamlines the problem, right? It's just it's showing that some some people don't want to change or they're too old to change.
Right.
Like that's really the sort of, entry point of this storyline. But I think there's basically not enough screen time to go over, necessarily the consultation that might have happened with advisors. Like, this is an opportunity where, Jorah is no longer around. So maybe, his counsel's not there to help in this scenario. So that really causes her to make this bad decision.
Yeah. And
what in story wise could this have, been utilized other than just like, this is some old stuff, the masters are going to take advantage of it. I think it's a line of dialogue that's so on the nose, and it just sets up next season of the masters sort of striking back. And it's brief, it's simple, it's pretty streamlined. But to me, it just felt a little bit lazy to sort of set up the whole relapse back into slavery that the masters are going to take advantage of. It could have been a little bit bigger. It could have played into the other characters. It could have been a better setup. But obviously, that's not what this episode's about. But again, it's thrown in there. It's rather quick. It's underdeveloped. And I think that's the reason why I don't necessarily like this sequence. And then the next person comes in, and it's like,
if anything, you can almost make the argument that you didn't even really need any Daenerys this episode. You can almost put this sequence in the beginning of next season where you may have a little bit more time to flesh it out and develop it. Also,
yeah, exactly. And like I get it. The kid, I'm assuming he's a shepherd.
Yeah. The dragons killed the shepherd's kid.
Yeah. And so the kid is gone, and, it's a cool prop. I enjoy seeing the prop of the burned bones and stuff. Like, really excellent job to the people that put that prop together. But like ultimately, it just leads to her, chaining up the other two dragons, which is important for later on. It's like, during her stay, in the temple or the pyramid, whatever you want to call it. Basically they're locked up. And so, it's, but even with that, later on, it's like when they get released, it's not like they're traumatized by being locked up.
It doesn't even take that much to be released. They literally just break out of the wall. It's like you couldn't have done that.
Yeah,
earlier.
It's just like, it's an excuse for Tyrion to go in there.
100%. Yeah, no, the logistics of the dragons being held in captivity, we'll get to it at a later point. But at least for now, I understand it because the whole purpose, the metaphorical purpose, the thing that's meant is the fact that she is, again, having to say goodbye to a part of herself that she's become so familiar with, that has become, again, like kind of this grinding force. These dragons have literally been a part of her since the beginning, since the first episode when she got them as eggs. And now the fact that they are kind of getting a little bit too out of control and the point that they could potentially be hindrances in this vision, in this new kind of new world order that she's trying to get across. The look is all in her face. But I definitely get where you're coming from as far as
I just think, her storyline in this particular season is really scattered. It's just sort of like a few scenes of her doing things, and like there's no real big build up, there's no real big conclusion. It's sort of like this is the end of her, is just like,
and essentially
listen to a couple people, and
that they had to take like an entire like last sect of an arc that was really, again, they kind of did the majority of in season 3 and kind of stretched out across the course of however many episodes. Because that's the other thing I forgot to do. Daenerys is in a lot of this season. Like, I think she's in more of this season than she was last season, if I'm not mistaken, before she becomes, like, again, one of, like, the central role players in the next couple of seasons as we get to. But the only thing that I'll ask
I think, what if, in this storyline, Jorah, somehow has a calming effect on the dragons, or like, obviously they listen to her, but Jorah's sort of like, maybe they could have introduced some sort of like, the dragons view him as like the father figure or something like that, and then she has to banish him. And then the dragons are going around,
the fact that
killing goats, killing people, they're terrorizing, and it's because the relationship.
It doesn't feel as personal. And if anything, that was, you could almost make the argument that was almost sort of established in her little moment that she had back in the first episode of this season where she's, just chilling with the dragons. The Jorah comes up and then they bring out the lamb and they, recoil on her. And it's supposed to set up the fact that they are getting older and they're basically in their adolescent phase. They're not going to listen to her as much. But
no, 100%. And I get that. I'm just trying. Maybe I'm grasping at straws. I'm like fantasy booking the episodes.
Trust me, I have plenty of those when we get to the later.
But the main thing is like, a little bit of cause and effect here of, what's going on, not just sort of like, blah, here it is, and throwing it out there. It's, a little bit of build up, a little bit of like, moment to think deep into it. I understand that this show is about interweaving many different stories, and sometimes we don't get really that much development on things. It's better if just having a scene and then move on, and maybe that storyline is not the best in this episode, but there's going to be some great moments in next season. So it's one of those things where they made a choice. They kept this really on the down low and streamlined it, and didn't really have much for Daenerys this episode. I just personally didn't like it. I could have done without it. Just because of all the reasons I said. It's just not developed as much, and I think I'm just imagining some cooler possibilities in my mind that I might want to would have loved to see, and therefore it's just like it had potential, but they didn't really go in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of it, like I said, the other big thing too about this episode that's predominantly there is like I said at the beginning of this episode, like I said, we're wrapping up A Storm of Swords. This is the end effectively of book 3. So that's the other thing too. A lot of the overhanging arcs that occurred this season are also technically still wrapping up arcs that were already previously established last season as well. Like I said, that we had the Red Wedding arc wrap up Rob's arc from last season, but we also, again, like Jon's arc is technically still hold over. Daenerys' arc is still hold over. Bran's arc, they really stretched out Bran's arc as far as that goes. Where again, like in the books, after Bran leaves Sam at the wall, the next thing that we get is him reaching the Weirtree with this sequence we're about to hit next, Beyond the Wall, which is Bran and his group. They finally, after 2 seasons, reach the Weirtree. And of course, naturally, because they've reached their destination, they've finally reached the point of where they can actually, hit the next point of their journey. Naturally, all hell breaks loose in the sense of, like, I just love how convenient it is that you have this little Weirtree here and you just have all of these random skeletons that are just there that conveniently come back to life, like, right as they're walking across. It's like, okay, so, like, what? Like, so what? They just all of these kind of undead soldiers that were kind of just lying here? And
I think it's one of those things where they don't really explain this. It just happens. And, knowing the rest of the series and then sort of like, applying what happens, towards the end of the series versus like what's happening now. Like you can only imagine that the Night King knew where the three-eyed raven was.
Right. And that sort is the thing established too in season 6 when we
exactly. And sort of had these as guards, there in case anyone approached. But I don't think that's really ever developed, in terms of this season.
Yeah.
Or it's never really revisited in later seasons that was the case. So, like, I agree with you. It's very odd.
Yeah.
That this sort of just happens out of nowhere. Like, it's not, out of the realm of possibility for this show that there are just like the undead waiting there. And they just are waiting for people to move.
It's not completely unbelievable, but it definitely does start to broach that gap. And we get into that as well. Even though I do love this episode with all of my heart, there are a lot of points in this episode that start to rear their ugly heads as far as like, okay, we're kind of just jumping through hoops, fast forwarding through a couple of these plot lines that we can get to the end. And I feel like those
exactly
really apparent in the next 2 seasons that we're
like, why is none of their journey, involve them fighting the undead? Like he has to take control of Odor and take someone out earlier on.
And this is even a point of confusion that I had in the books, which is that, so wait, they were trekking through how many miles of unknown land north of the wall? They didn't run into any undead soldiers before they reached the Weirtree. Not one.
And forgive me, I don't remember the guy that dies in the scene, right?
Jojen, yeah. Oh, Jojen. That's the other thing too. Jojen, still alive in the books. Does not die in this sequence of the books.
So I'm okay with Jojen dying in the show.
That's fine.
But, like,
it gives Mira like some more like emotional, catharsis
there. Yeah, but I think the main thing is like, he's having visions of the Weirtree and seeing Bran with the tree, when they're at Caster's, and they're sort of tied up.
Right.
Why don't we see like a little bit of, why don't we just see like a zombie in that vision?
Like a skeleton hand. Like, yeah, very, very helpful, those green seer visions too,
Well, I'm just saying, like, he could have started having a seizure and then saw like the Night King.
Right. It would have made more sense.
And then there's sort of a connection in our mind as the audience when they get there. That the skeletons are going to pop up and it wouldn't be out of nowhere.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I again, this is a criticism that I'm going to levy towards George R.R. Martin, not Benioff and Weiss, because at this point, even though they are deviating, Benioff and Weiss are still pulling a lot of stuff from Martin's material. And this is definitely the point to me where I personally felt like, Martin was really not sure of where he was going to take the next phase. Because like I have a long-running theory about the Game of Thrones books, and it's why Martin is taking so goddamn long to finish Winds of Winter, besides the fact that, the Game of Thrones property just became way too big and popular, which is that after the Red Wedding, he kind of was really spinning his wheels and figuring out, like, oh, shit, what do I do with the rest of these characters? And that's kind of why he kind of, like, had to spend so much of Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons kind of setting them up. And then he's taken 10 years to get to Winds of Winter, because Winds of Winter was going to be, like, the beginning of the actual like end of the whole story. Like that's the whole end of the catharsis, because technically Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons are all one. It's all one big story. It's one big setup, and there's so many things that happen in that we still haven't gotten the payoff for, because all of that payoff is going to come in Winds of Winter, which is effectively going to act as the Infinity War to this whole Game of Thrones arc, and that it's the part one of the two-part wrap-up to this whole arc that somebody else is going to effectively do with Dream of Spring, because there's no way in hell that he's going to probably even write Dream of Spring, or maybe he's going to take the notes from Dream of Spring and incorporate them into the notes for Wind of Winter. Who knows? But
listen, I'm not going to be down on George R.R. Martin if he, started this series. He became popular. He's having deals, like video game deals. And
so many deals.
And
I think the most recent thing is like apparently he was in talks with HBO for 317 different Game of Thrones spinoff ideas. I'm just like,
I don't really look too much into it, but like I'm not gonna fault a guy for making all these deals off of a series that he hasn't even finished yet. Like the guy, is focused on the doing the things and working on the projects that he wants to work on. And, it's one of those things where he could very easily, say, hey, I'll release this next book, eventually, but like the final book, I'm going to pass on to someone.
Right. Which is very, very clearly the case.
Yeah. Why not? It's like, he doesn't have to complete it. I don't think he needs to. And I think, the fans should be pretty clear that it's like, you know what, if he completes it, great. If he doesn't, like, someone will
what it is, I'll tell you where it comes from.
Book.
It would have been one thing. I think personally, I know this is the case for me, and I don't know if this is the case for all fans, but I definitely know the case for me is the fact that because I don't think we would have had this problem if the ending of the TV, if they nailed the ending of the TV show, like if they nailed the show, I don't think we would have been having these conversations, and I don't think people would have nearly cared as much. I mean, they would have cared, but not to the extent that they do now. I think it's because not only was the finale so bad, but also just so inherently unsatisfying in addition to being just poor storytelling. I think that's the reason why, because it's almost like fans have this idea of, okay, that's not the real ending because we're still waiting for the actual real ending of the story, if I can offer like some insight there.
Just think about it this way, like in 30 years, they'll just reboot Game of Thrones.
Oh God!
Well, hey, they'll reboot it. They'll have the books will be done. They'll reboot it, and it'll be sort of like what is it? That anime, Full Metal Alchemist. Like they went through the whole series, and then the manga finished, and then they redid the series.
Well, don't they do that with every anime now?
It's possible.
Like I know about the whole Naruto and Naruto Shippuden. I know it's a continuation, but like anime, they just run that shit forever. So
yeah, so they could do the same thing. It's like if streaming services are here to stay for the inevitable future,
which they definitely are.
They're gonna always have to create content constantly. So I think it's one of those things where I don't think fans have to necessarily worry about it. This show show ended the way that it ended, we'll definitely discuss it when we get to those scenes. But like, I keep saying is like, I sort of more recently, within the last year binged, a lot of the series in anticipation for the show. And I think those later seasons are meant to be binged like episode to episode to episode because
for sure,
it's like when I was binging it versus watching it week to week, it didn't seem that bad.
Right.
It just
for sure.
it just felt good to finish the storyline and kind of stream through the story and get to the end.
And that's definitely a part of the reason as to why I feel like those last couple seasons are much more palatable in when I was watching them, because it was just this sense of like, okay, it felt like in the moment we were moving so fast towards that conclusion. Like I still remember like coming out of high school and into early college and being so psyched for what they pulled. Again, if we want to talk about just season 6 and what that pulled off on a technical scale alone, I mean, it's breathtaking to say the least. But real quick, so we wrap this up. The White Walkers attack, they kill Jojen in the confusion. They meet again. Another thing that the title references the children of the forest.
Yeah, one child, right?
One child, of course, right?
There's no other
with not nearly as finished effect. They didn't
so where
to be able to pay that many other
where are the children? There's only the child
hiding in the Weirtree is what I'm assuming. But I think that when they actually go inside the tree, you see like another one like hiding in the corner, or whatever. She brings them inside. There's some invisible force, assumedly generated by the three-eyed raven, that prevents the dead from being able to get in. She brings them before the three-eyed raven. She sets Bran before them. We kind of get it's another infamous Game of Thrones recasting. It's Struan Roger portraying him before he gets recast with Max von Sydow. When Bran comes back in season 6. Still not quite sure why they just decided to cut the Bran arc from season 5. And then just come back to it in season 6, like no time has passed. Like I'll get into that as far as continuity issues go once we get back to it in season 6, especially. But he tells Bran, of course, very ominously that you will never walk again, but you will fly. And it's like,
I think
magic stuff.
I think Bran's storyline, because it's going into the fantasy, but it's going slow. It's like revealing a mystery one step at a time. I think that was one of the most interesting arcs to really follow in the series. And like, this is the moment where it's like, oh man, stuff is about to happen.
Right.
So season 5, if I remember correctly, doesn't really have much.
They leave him out of season 5 completely.
So that was like a big disappointment. And then
I remember going into that just being like, but why? Like, well, what's the reasoning for this? I'm like,
but then obviously, I think
put it this way: it would have been one thing if they were gonna do Feast for Crows as one season. I'd be like, okay, so Bran's not the only character that's gonna be like that. There's gonna be a bunch of characters that we don't see this season, and then the next season we're gonna bring those characters back in the fold. Like, it would have been one thing if they had done Feast for Crows as one season and then Dance with Dragons as another season, but they didn't do that. They still had
I think,
all the storylines still going. They just left out Bran. I'm like, so that's what makes the decision a little bit confusing for me in hindsight.
I think season 6, how that storyline sort of comes and what happens during that season is well worth it. It's well worth the wait.
I agree. I like actually of all the original storylines that they put in that were finished essentially from the books, like I think that the Bran arc in season 6 is probably my favorite.
Yeah, but I think definitely they could have had his presence there. They could have just. They didn't really do much with the idea that he could see into the past and he can actually impact the past. Like they didn't have really enough time to dive into that,
which sucks because again, you had that result with the Hodor death in season 6, which is again like one of the most gangbusters, gobsmack, and impactful moments. But like because they
could have really set this up a little more in season 5 if they had some time to spend on it. But that's about it. It's there's nothing much left to say here. Like I think this is such a great tease to what the Bran story could have been. And then they skip a season and it's like they basically just destroy the momentum because all you want to see is Bran in the next season. All you want to see is
like
what's going to happen.
Like foaming at the mouth or be like, oh shit, we're finally going to get the three-eyed raven, like kind of for lack of a better, like Jedi training sessions essentially. And then we just go a whole season without any of that. And then by the time you get back to it in season 6, you're so focused on Jon Snow's death and what comes from that you're like, oh yeah, Bran, I forgot about that and how cool that was. So still really, really baffled by that decision in hindsight, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
Well, they had their reasons for it. So like, unless you see an interview or whatever where they explain it, it's going to be a little bit of
yeah,
mystery
it was
for
basically
us.
film school for us, and that they basically admitted, yeah, we had no idea what we were doing there. Oh my
yeah.
God, we'll save that.
Just, you're just going on the attack right now.
Oh yeah, well, this to me, and I'll get it. This is the high point. This is the apex of the show. The show only goes downhill from here. So yeah, of course I'm gonna be on the attack. Are you kidding me? Battle of the Bastards is all technicals in hindsight. There's nothing really that I take away from that episode that's like really like it's much. Battle of the Bastards to me in hindsight is really much more so of an in the moment kind of a thing. And in hindsight, a lot of aspects of that outside of the technicals do not age well for that episode.
Yeah, I think a lot of the show, like at least the first 4 seasons, sets us up for the really epic battle sequences.
Right, and
they are enjoyable.
That's all that they deliver on is the problem, is the battle sequences. The problem is there's still so much other storylines that are happening that they could still be giving that same amount of thought and detail to, but because of both the economics of where TV storytelling was going, and also for the fact that they were kind of themselves in wrap-up mode, because that was also when they started getting the negotiations for all those other deals with Disney and Netflix for all those other projects that then promptly fell through. It's like all these different cascading factors just came into effect, and it's just the point where Game of Thrones ultimately became too big for its own good, if I'm being completely honest. And so the fact of this episode kind of signifying the end of that time period, it's like, yeah, obviously I'm going to be a little personal because I love this show and I loved it when it was like actually good and not just like, technically brilliant. So, but let's get into the other huge cornerstone of this episode, which is the King's Landing arc.
We already, started to talk about it. We kind of teased it earlier on, but there's a lot of cool things that happen in King's Landing. Like, obviously, the first one is, the mountain. He's
the whole thing with the mountain and the setup of Zombie Gregor. Yeah,
he's still alive, and this is one of the things that we talked about it when we saw the Mountain and the Viper episode. Yes. Like, they lead us to believe that the Mountain is completely dead, like because he has like plenty of puncture wounds. He has the poison,
but it shows. Is he still breathing on the table? And that's I couldn't tell.
No, I think he is. Like the whole idea is that he was like. It was like a flesh wound, but the poison is seeping through his system. And
exactly,
it's like, that's not what they filmed. But,
exactly.
Okay,
the show,
sure.
The book definitely did a better job of presenting that than the show did. But at the very least, they still carry that through into this one sequence. And you have, like, again, Qyburn examining the the body and being like, oh.
Well, I like how Cersei is taking charge here. She's like, what's his face? Maester, whatever his name is. Pycelle. Yeah,
still just trying to argue as to why he's even still around.
Yeah, so Cersei dismisses him, and he's like, "This is my laboratory," and it's like, "Not anymore."
Not anymore.
And so, Cersei's already making changes, and getting comfortable in her sort of new aggression, and so Qyburn is going to save the mountain. If all things go well. Basically, I think he says, if my previous experiments are any indication, something like that. And it's like, he just stops for a second. He stops for a second and just goes, this will probably change him, though.
It's like the procedure might change him, but I
love how Cersei responds.
Anton Lesser, the actor.
Yeah, the two of them are like, they're kind of speaking past each other,
right?
Or maybe not past each other,
but they have this understanding
in code.
But they have this great understanding of back and forth, where it's like, okay, I may not understand what you do, but if what you do can get me what I need, then go
and then
for
Cersei goes, "Will he be weaker?"
He's like, oh no!
It's like, oh no!
Oh no! He's like, I'm getting rid of a little thing, a little barrier, a little like hindrance point called conscious. Once that's gone with, oh man, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, so it's a cool scene. I think it definitely like Qyburn is one of those characters that you would expect to sort of be a throwaway character that they brought up for like a season, but the fact that he remains and he kind of becomes that like. That evil right hand of Cersei, is pretty cool. I think that is definitely a great development. I think the fact that the zombie mountain comes into play, I think they underutilize the character. Like
100%,
obviously, it's whenever Cersei's just in trouble, it's like show the mountain. And the whole idea of like the Hound versus the mountain. Was totally mishandled. It's like it should not have happened. That's literally just thinking about
like, we only got two episodes left. Throw it in there. Sure, we got to get this over with anyways. We got to get out of here.
Yeah, you know what? They could have just never had it happen and then said, "Hey, listen, we have a spin-off show. It's basically about the Hound hunting
The Hound in the mountains, exactly.
Yeah,
Which almost,
exactly.
again, missed opportunity right there. But again, they had to get him off screen.
Yeah,
So we already pretty much talked about the Cersei and the Jaime sex scene. So we'll skip that for now. So and we also talked about Jaime kind of freeing Tyrion. I have a point that I want to bring up again. I know that you are so fond of this right now, but another point that they left out from the books that I think is crucial as far as kind of, to me, also why this is Tyrion's real last moment of actually being an interesting and compelling character on this show. But the other moment you obviously being the Shae death, which is just one of the most brilliantly filmed sequences of the entire season. But the big thing for me, the big takeaway here is the decision to leave out the Tysa reveal, which is in the books. What happened is that when Jaime frees Tyrion and he's bringing him to Varys, in the show, obviously, we get this very loving, just being like, okay, thank you. You're my brother. You're the only one that stood up for me. And understand, this really heart-wrenching goodbye sequence as Jaime says goodbye to Tyrion and they don't think they're going to see each other again. But in the books, what happens is that it doesn't end on as let's call it a heartfelt moment, in the sense of where Jaime casually let slip that the original plan that Tywin had with setting Tyrion up with the prostitute as his wife before viciously pulling back the curtain, that he talked to Shae and Bran about way back in season 1. It's revealed that Jaime had a part in helping that. And it's that revelation in the books that makes Tyrion feel like Jaime, who is the last person that he had to rely on, has also betrayed him. And so it's and kind of where we follow Tyrion with the next phase of his journey going into the next book that we see him in, that being A Dance of Dragons. We're led to believe that Tyrion is now on this mad quest of revenge, even at the expense of his own life and others. So we're meant to believe that this has almost unlocked a new sadistic side of Tyrion, and potentially we can see Tyrion almost helping contribute to Daenerys' reign of terror, and that Tyrion is in favor of Daenerys' reign, of Daenerys' conquest, becoming the conqueror, for lack of a better word, versus in the show, we kind of see him now, he's just the voice of reason. And I don't know, it kind of robs Tyrion of, he goes from being the most interesting and compelling character on the show to kind of just being another secondary character. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Hey, listen, I think, I didn't read the books, so it's not like I sort of got this characterization of Tyrion that you're describing. I think the main thing is that sounds pretty compelling to me. If that is the case and that's the direction it was going, I think with what we saw with the end of the TV series, where Daenerys does burn down King's Landing and sort of make that unbearable decision to really just
I feel
be
like
who she was, her family was.
It would just make a lot more sense if Tyrion is in favor of her mad bloodlust the entire time, and he's fully on board and he's urging her to do it. And then at the end, when he has the shocking reveal,
he can even be conflicted, a lot of the time.
And he is. That's the thing. He is conflicted, but it's the whole thing of where it's fuck my family, fuck the world, let's just burn it all to the ground. That's kind of the mindset, the mentality that he has. That's not at all the case that we have going into season 5 and 6. And I don't know, it takes away to me from a lot of the more interesting stuff. And I've been very vocal about this, even when the last couple seasons were running, is that I'm like, wow, Tyrion went from being the best character on this show to being kind of just another disposable, expendable player, which is you don't want that from Tyrion Lannister. He was the guy who you were rooting for the majority of the show,
Yeah, he definitely obviously becomes a visor to Daenerys. He does have a few good storylines during the whole his tenure with Daenerys. I think when they actually finally get to Westeros and there were basically he's making bad decisions and losing her favor.
Right.
That's when his character really has nothing to do. He's at the mercy of what she feels in the moment.
Right. And I would even make the argument that starts in season 6 when he's left in control of Meereen, because we see his decisions making in Meereen doesn't really result in anything actually fruitful. And if anything, it's almost like he's reliant on Daenerys coming in with the dragons to solve everything, and then he gets rewarded as I don't know. We'll get to that in season 6. Tyrion's arc in season 6 is probably one of my most problematic parts of the show, but it's just the fact that, like, to me, I guess the point that I'm trying to come to is the fact that this is the last point to me where Tyrion is actually an interesting character. There's a few brief moments in season 5, a few brief moments that he has back and forth with Varys, but this is, to me, like, really the end of Tyrion being an interesting character, and it comes from...
Well, I think your theory's out there, and you let me and you let the Talkin Thrones audience know. And the fact is, we're going to be able to chart this going forward, right?
For sure.
As season 5, 6, and whatnot continue, we're going to be able to see what we think about Tyrion. And does this hold true that he is no longer one of the more intriguing characters on the show? He's just sort of one of the ancillary characters, like, to a certain degree, like he's lost his, quest for the throne. Like now he's basically, goes and becomes Daenerys's sort of right-hand man. And he's not really seeking major ambition anymore.
Right, which is fine, but I would make the argument that he was never really seeking that to begin with. Aside from the one conversation that he had with Tywin about Casterly Rock, he never really seemed like the type of person that had really that grandstanding ambition. And if he did, then that was just something that I missed completely.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily was to sit on the throne, but it's like he loved playing the game. He loved
he was always more so about the action rather than the final destination. That's the thing that always struck me about Tyrion as a character.
Yeah, and so I think his character becomes more about like maybe Daenerys should be on the throne. I'm all in on that, and I'm just going to support her. And so I think he loses. Maybe he gains. It's more like he thought, he was doing all these things for the good of the realm. I think he was sort of like a Varys type, and he was trying to make it work with, his family, and the other sort of families in Westeros. But ultimately it didn't work. It's too complicated. So, the fact is he feels he knows how to do it, and that's to get this outside party to come in and break the wheel, to use Daenerys's term, and basically replace it with something else. And I think that's sort of the direction in which his character goes. He decides to remove himself from the situation. Obviously he was kind of forced into it. But then he's okay with not really fixing the problem from within. He has this new approach, which is to fix it by putting Daenerys on the throne.
Of course, and of course that also stems from partly, his killing of both Shae and Tywin, and the fact that he feels that he once again had to say goodbye to very crucial kind of foundational blocks for him. Could we just talk about the Tywin death for a second too before we move on?
Listen, I love the fact that it was by crossbow, probably the same crossbow that
sitting on the toilet
Joffrey had.
Oh, it's great. And for a fact, like when he saw the crossbow on the wall, he's like, oh, that little shit's crossbow. Oh, that's what I'm using. And it's it's great.
And the amount of times that Tywin's like, let me just get my knickers on and we'll go to my chambers.
And he's like, oh no. He's like, oh no. He's like,
we could talk. We could talk in my chambers. Trust me.
Is this your grand aspiration to see your father humiliated? And it's like, yeah, kind of. After everything that you put me through this entire season, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, but the fact is, like, I love the moment where it's like, I can't go back to your chambers because that's where I killed Shae.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this, and then he's like, well, she's just a whore, and
he says that one too many times.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, just his usage of that word and putting it out there, and like, basically just leads Tyrion to sort of let loose, right?
Yeah.
This is what the episode's about, is really, Cersei, speaking up for herself, defending herself and her choices. Jaime not letting her father and sister really just lock Tyrion away and let him get murdered. He's going to stand up for what he believes in. And you know what? Tyrion does the same. He's going, he could have escaped without a problem, without coming back and finding Shae and leading to her death at his hands. Could have, if that didn't happen, then, the fact that he went and found Tywin, it's the whole thing is him sort of deciding, this is what I should have did long ago.
Yes.
Is, basically took my father out of the picture.
Exactly.
And I think, he does that and he realizes he still has to escape because, if he definitely was, he definitely was going to get executed the way that the trial by combat ended.
Right.
But, now they for sure are going to get rid of him.
For sure, absolutely. And the other thing, too, also about this death is that it's Tywin's fatal flaw finally coming home to roost. We've talked about it really since Season 3 when Tywin first came to King's Landing, where he ultimately would meet his demise. He even kind of eerily foreshadowed it all the way back in Season 2 when he was at Harrenhal with Arya saying, this will be my last war, which is that, again, we've talked about this since day one. Tywin's fatal flaw has always been treating his children as commodities, always seeing them as just tools to extend his own vision, and by nature, the Lannister, kind of stronghold over the realm, and always disregarding their own individual thoughts, wants, and needs. And we see that come back to bite him in the ass in all different ways, with Cersei, openly defying him and kind of taking charge, with Jaime making the decision to free Tyrion, and then with that decision ultimately resulting in Tyrion, killing him. It's and also this, again, just convincing him that he's always the master strategist, that even when he's literally got a gun, or in this case a crossbow, pointed at him, he'll be able to reason his way out of it. But again, he could never guess. It's a thing that we talk about all the time, which it reminds me very similar to the death of Omar on The Wire, which is where we talk about the guy where, like, again, how could a person like Omar, who is always so smart and always seems 10 steps ahead of the car, how could the guy who orchestrated the Red Wedding, how could you possibly take a guy out like that? And the answer is always simple. It's always from a place that they least expect. And that's what happened with Omar when he's capped by a kid who he would have in a million years would have guessed, because he doesn't take them seriously. And it's the same thing that happens with Tywin, in that he gets killed, well, again, from a place that he never would have expected, which is his own son, who he effectively thought that he had finally gotten rid of and finally was out of the picture and out of his way.
Yeah, I think Cersei says it best. Like, if he took one hard look at his children, he would have seen.
Right.
And, I think he doesn't do that. And that's Cersei's point. And, the fact is that's ultimately his undoing. It's the fact that he blamed Tyrion for his wife's death, and the fact that he was, basically born, as a, imp or whatever slur they want to use against him. Essentially that sort of... He was born
impure, essentially, in Tywin.
Yeah, that blinded him, instead of, like, treating him for what he was, which was his son. And that sort of led to this moment, right? It's like, you tried to kill me numerous times, so, like, now I have the opportunity and I'm taking it because you've pushed me to this point. And Tyrion, I think, he goes into obviously his father's chamber with murder on his mind, finds Shae, and can't forgive her.
Right.
Obviously,
especially when she tries to attack him too.
Well, yeah, because she knows, she knows what she did, and she probably expects the worst in everybody. But ultimately I think she made a misjudgment, I think.
Yes.
I think the fact that she grabs a knife and goes for it leads him to sort of this blind rage that led to that, him grabbing the necklace and choking her. So I think it's one of those things where, like, he was in that premeditated mindset to get Tywin. And so after Shae is sort of unfortunately dealt with, that makes it very easy for him to stalk down Tywin and do what he's got to do. Because, like, everything is lost because of Tywin, and he's going to get his
even
revenge.
says it later when her and Tyrion see each other again for the first time in years in Season 7, when she's like, yeah, you killing Tywin, it left us open, it left us vulnerable. And to an extent, that there's a lot of truth to that, as we see. But Tyrion, the only thing that he's got to be focused on is getting the hell out of there, and he does. And I love the look on Varys' face when he lifts him into the box, he puts him there, and then he's right about to walk back to the castle, like, oh yeah, nothing possibly went wrong. He even says it too when he sees Tyrion. He's like, what have you done? And like, you just see it, the look in Tyrion's face. And as he's walking back towards the castle, you just see the bells start ringing. You see the color just drain out of his face. He just turns around, like, nope, and gets on the ship. I love that.
Yeah, I think it's a great moment because
great little details there.
For the most part, Varys knows that whatever it was, whatever happened, this plot is ruined.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So, like, they're going to start asking questions, like, how did Tyrion get out? It's going to eventually lead towards Varys being founded.
Yes.
And so he knows that he just, he doesn't like it, but he knows he's got to get out of there.
Yes, 100%. So let's wrap up this episode and this season with the moment that you've been waiting for, the duel.
Yeah. We talked, I think we talked about, the main outcome of the duel, but, it's like Podrick, is the only one to really recognize who the Hound is and who.
Well, Brienne's never seen him before, so that makes sense.
Yeah, to a certain extent, like I think he realizes that it's Arya, but he doesn't really say anything. Brienne sort of is questioning them, and at least
the lead up to it too, where she runs into Arya and she sees her training with a sword, and she immediately sees something that she can like kind of relate to in terms of kinship. It's like, oh, here's this little girl who's like trying to like actually deal with primarily a masculine thing in a man's world. So that's something that she can like automatically kind of gravitate towards, and like they kind of start the connection with. Again, it's a thing that's completely original to the books, but I think that it's one of the few things aside from the whole Bran arc in season 6 that Benioff and Weiss I think actually got really right, which is kind of introducing this kind of camaraderie that Brienne develops with both of Catelyn Stark's daughters, as a result of this oath that she swore to her.
Yeah, I think this scene, is well written from start to finish, and the fact is, it's like, going to the swords. It's like, oh, mine's needle, what's yours? Oh, it's Oathkeeper, and it's like, I used to be just like you, and my father didn't let me fight with the other people, so I continued fighting anyway. And eventually he told me, like, well, I might as well teach you to do it right.
Right.
So, and that's sort of like, if Ned Stark didn't die, this would have been exactly what Arya would have done.
Exactly.
And so there is that instant connection between the two of them. And I think making that parallel clear makes a lot of sense. And then, obviously when the Hound comes back from around the corner.
I love the look on his face where they literally, Arya is like, you can take a shit later. Let's go. We got people here. And he just comes out literally like he's been caught with his pants down because he's literally buttoning himself. The look at it, it's just priceless.
Yeah, well, listen, they're travelers on the road, and this is, something that's, it's how they basically integrate like humanity and
right.
into the show is they play with the humor of it, but also at the same time they make us aware of like what type of world this is,
right?
Down to those little details, and I think that's great.
The other big thing too, also that I'll say about this sequence as well, like just as far as how they frame it with the kind of the conversation, how that builds into the fight is kind of, again, it's also almost to me like an encapsulation of the entire show, which that we go in wanting to believe in the best of people. We have this almost like kind of like set idea in our heads just based off what we know. And then once we realize the reality of the situation, that's when it becomes a lot more morally gray, a lot more confusing. It's difficult to determine who the good guys and the bad guys are, which is, again, part of the whole thing that Martin envisioned with the story when he was first originally conceiving it. So I feel like kind of for them to end the episode, also the halfway point of the entire series, on this type of a moment where you have Brienne, who's attempted to do something good as part of her fulfillment of her oath towards Catelyn Stark, and then you have the Hound coming in, and he's like, okay, so you've been saying that you're going to do all these things, but I've actually been doing them regardless of my intentions. That whole kind of actions over words thing and how that spills out. And then what is the result? Arya gets away from both of them. The Hound is left almost dead, and it's like, what ultimately is the result here? She's off to sail away. Arya, as kind of the recipient of seeing these two sides going back and forth, realizes, well, what am I actually standing to get here? I have to do this on my own now.
I think it's made clear based on the conversation between the Hound and Brienne. It's like Brienne essentially wants to do what the Hound just did, which is try to find some safety zone to return Arya to.
Right.
But the Hound knows that's not possible because everyone's dead. Winterfell is some rubble. In the Eyrie, like her aunt is gone. Like there is no place for her. And, it's like they're traveling companions, right? They know each other. They kind of know that they're safe with each other. And therefore he makes the summation that that's what's best for her. And Brienne is like, well, I kept this oath, and this it's my job to figure this out for her. And so then the two of them start fighting over Arya as if she has no say in the matter. Right. And I think witnessing that, although this is not like something that they draw our attention to, this is something that we have to kind of critically think about ourselves. But her seeing the two of them fight over her makes her realize that, you know, she's in charge of her own life and she has to make choices. And, you know, the Hound is right to a certain degree that, you know, she really can't go off on her own. You know, it's like the world is a dangerous place, but she understands that she has to, you know, and she has to sort of, you know, the next part of her journey is going to be on her own. And, you know, it's like she's going to have to do whatever it takes to figure out her place in the world. And I think we all know where it is. It's on the docks selling some clams.
Selling oysters, clams, and cockles. Yeah, unfortunately, we have to waste time with her for 2 seasons in Meereen, ultimately. Which, again, like, the one thing that I'll say as far as the whole Arya arc, I definitely have more of a... Not a soft spot, but more of an understanding of an arc than I did when I watched it the first time. Where, again, because the whole of Arya's arc for the entirety of the time, because she was just constantly being shuffled around from location to location, meeting all these different characters. I never really got as firm a sense of what her arc was, as opposed to the other characters who, as time went on, it became pretty kind of clear what their arcs were going to be. But Arya, I was always just kind of at a loss. I'm like, what was the point of all this? What did she ultimately serve? What was the point of her character? And then just kind of the fact that she was always the outsider, kind of looking at understanding that essentially nothing was going to work, and that as far as her relying on other people, that she was always going to have to find her own way. You know, it definitely makes the appeal of her going to Braavos. Sorry, I said Marine before. The appeal of her going to Braavos and training in House of Black and White. It definitely makes that idea really appealing, because this is kind of the only real thing that she did on her own that wasn't kind of told to her, you know, whether from her father or Yoren or Tywin or the Brotherhood or the Hound or Brienne, is that this is the only person that kind of is able to help her in some capacity. So it makes sense for them to bring then the Braavos arc back, as far as, oh, okay, you're a Braavosi. This is something that I've kind of been carrying around for the last few seasons. I can use this, you know? So
I think the arcs for Arya and Sansa are pretty similar. It's basically, you know, they're sort of controlled to a certain degree, right? You know, it's like Sansa is trapped by Joffrey and the Lannisters, and then basically gets, you know, into the situation with Littlefinger, and she has to learn how to make her own decisions, and sort of, you know, eventually she goes to the Boltons too, but she has to take control over her own life. And, you know, it takes her, you know, Sansa a little bit longer in the series to get to that point. But, you know, Arya makes that decision here in the season finale of, like, she has to sort of make decisions for herself. And everything that's happened before, of like the Hound sort of taking her for ransom and whatever, it's like, yeah, she's met some different people. She's had this different experience. But ultimately she has to kind of make her own choices and go on her own journey. And I think it's well expressed in this, you know, sequence, that's what she's finally doing. You know, and it kind of makes sense that she would, you know, be able to come to this conclusion a little bit sooner than Sansa, just because of, you know, sort of that adventurous personality that she's had, you know, growing up. You know, she always wanted to deal with weapons. She always didn't want to fit the role that was meant for her. And so, you know, I think she's able to come to the conclusion sooner, just because of that adventurous spirit.
Got it. Yeah. So you're okay with the so you're on board with the whole what's west of Westeros being kind of like her conclusatory arc at the end of this show.
I think, you know, once we get to the end of the Many-Faced God storyline and she comes back to Westeros, like, I don't think it's necessarily clear exactly how things,
many other things.
Yeah, I don't think things are necessarily clear how it resolves. You know, is it Arya or is it not? You know, was Arya taken over, or did Arya succeed in her task?
Kind of in a weird way, doing kind of similar to what they did with Bran, where it's like, okay, so we thought that was Bran that we were still seeing at the end of season 6, and by the time we get back into season 7, it's like, oh no, that was just it turns out he's now the Three-Eyed Raven, and Bran Stark, a version of Bran Stark that we essentially knew, kind of died in that Weirtree, similar to like the previous version of Arya Stark that we knew kind of died in some sense in the House of Black and White and Braavos.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's one of those things where, like, the arc doesn't really, we don't get any clarity to it. We have to sort of fill in the blanks. She just comes back as, you know, this cold calculating, good,
really
like
merciless,
fantastic warrior.
Yes.
And it's like obviously she loves her family.
Yeah, that's
so
about
like,
it.
So it's I don't know. It's very strange what happens, in the later seasons with Arya. So I think the arc, leading up to sort of the end of the Many-Faced God, storyline, and obviously her sights are going back to Westeros. I think that's all kind of works.
Okay.
I think later on her involvement with the Night King and like with the phrase and stuff like that. I think that stuff
phrase makes sense. The Night King less.
Yeah,
so.
well, it makes sense that she would sort of seek that revenge, but like she's also a new person. Like,
right.
It's
that's true.
To me, it's like she had, the story would be like she has to go through the phrase to get back to Winterfell, and then like, when she's there, basically the phrase, they have a chance to do the right thing, and they they offend her in some way, and therefore she's justified in it. Like the storyline could have been a little more developed. Like I understand she's a revenge character, and now that she has this new capabilities, she has the way of seeking her ultimate revenge. But the way that they handled the storyline, it was never really about her getting these powers for revenge. And so they just kind of toss it into that. Like she comes back to Westeros, and then she just starts, bringing up, doing Death Wish like Charles Bronson, just eliminating people. Like it's like she's just
Charles Bronson.
Yeah, she's like, she is vengeance, if you saw the Batman movie.
Yeah.
But, like she's just going around like slaughtering her enemies from her list as if nothing happened in the last 2 seasons, 3 seasons, whatever. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's they kind of just throw her back into Westeros, and she, she's a new character, but she seems to be focused on her old ambitions. And so, there's something funky about it that we'll have to explore when we cover those episodes.
Which we will indeed when we cover those later seasons. But first and foremost, people, that's it. That is the end of season 4. We've wrapped up yet another season of Talkin Thrones. But like I said, we are not stopping. We are not coming to a halt anytime soon. We are going all the way through. No breaks. Like I said, no breaks up until we are done with this show. We'll be back with season 5 next week. The war is to come. But before we get out of here, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to a few of the characters that we lost this season. We haven't been keeping up with the death count as much per episode, but we're still keeping up with it per season. So this season, we said goodbye to Polliver, Axel Florent, Joffrey Baratheon, Dantos Hollard, Ollie's parents and his village, the Myronese champion and his horse, Locke, Carl Tannen, Rast, and the rest of the Night's Watch mutineers. All those poor Bolton and Ironborn soldiers killed in Yara's very stupid raid. The farmer that the Hound killed and Mercy killed. Rorge and Biter, Lysa Arryn, the residents of Molestown, the Ironborn soldiers at Moat Kylan, Oberyn Martell, Steer, Pip, Gren, Ygritte, Jojen, Reed, Shae, and Tywin Lannister. We said goodbye to all of those characters. We said goodbye to a lot of ancillary characters this season, like I said, because this really does bookmark, let's call it a certain phase of the show. The first 4 seasons of the show we've come are kind of wrapped up, and as we kind of enter, the transition period into the streaming period, we get a lot bigger, we get a lot more action, we get a lot more spectacle. That's all coming in the next 4 seasons as we wrap up this show. We are officially past the halfway point now. And with that being said, people, we hope you guys continue to join us each and every week as we recap Game of Thrones all the way through to the finale. Thank you guys so much for tuning in with and listening with us each and every single week. Be sure to follow my co-host Pat and everything that he's going on at Patrick W. Huber across all platforms. Be sure to follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. And if you're not subscribed to us on YouTube and Twitch, please be sure to go and do that at Talkin TV Podcast on both Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch. Follow us on all the platforms there. And as always, people, remember, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week with season 5.